Amber, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us, and John as well for joining us this morning. We've posted the film, the 3-minute film that you made for your media production course at De Montfort University. And so I've actually got some questions for both of you as well from people, which is quite good. I want to start a little bit myself talking to you about it. I mean, why did you come up with the idea originally, Amber?
Yeah, well, originally I'd actually heard John talk about it quite a long time ago, and it was a story that really hit me. Like, it was like I've had a very fortunate upbringing. I've never been in a crisis or something like that, and it was just like unbelievable almost to me. And obviously I was very young when the whole 9/11 thing happened, so the story was quite hard hitting, and I thought that would make a great documentary. And if we ever got the chance to go to New York, and for him to revisit New York, then I would love to do that and capture that. Yeah. Okay.
So one of the questions that we got from Paul and Sarah, because they had a look at the documentary overnight, was, did you have very much in your mind what you wanted to make, or did you kind of discuss it with John first and then it was a collaboration with the bits that you covered? Because I mean, 3 minutes, as you well know, can be the longest period of time in the world, or not the shortest period of time. So, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a collaboration / we just kind of went out and filmed it, and then did the interview afterwards, and that kind of worked. We filmed him kind of going round New York again and following where he had been on that day, and it kind of just built the documentary around that. So
can I just mention one thing that's probably not appreciated by anybody, is that we had very, very limited time in which to do it. Amber was going over for some kind of student trip, I think it was, and I was going over the week before to do some media stuff over there to do with an app that I'd produced, different subject, and I changed my schedule. We overlapped in New York by just under 3 hours. So we met up and had, it was about 2 hours 45 minutes. We watched it actually filmed. She followed me with the camera. Great, nice to see you. I was off, and then the sort of interview bit was filmed later on in Leicester, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I do like the escalator scene. That's one of my favourite bits, actually. I don't know what it is about it as well, but I suppose, being a certain age and having been in a few tall buildings and stuff, that kind of escalator gives you a sense of scale of some of these buildings as well. Not a lift or stairs. They've got escalators in them, and I think that's really, maybe people who haven't been or don't really know much history about the Twin Towers understand just how big they are. And probably why it feeds so many conspiracy theories quite easily, really. It self-serves itself due to the fact that it's a bit like the Titanic. It's too big to be unthinkable. John, I've got a question for you, again from Paul and Sarah, and they were saying about what's your view on the whole decision not to rebuild the Twin Towers and actually leave the footprint as a memorial?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, isn't it? I guess politically it's difficult in lots and lots of different ways. I think it's important that there is some kind of memorial. It's a difficult one, when you think the tsunami of when was it, 2011, 12, something like that, killed 300,000 people. Not belittling what happened in New York, but in terms of world events in the past 20 years. It's a small thing in terms of number of deaths, but it's a big thing because it was the first major attack like that on the Western world. It was the first time that this whole war on terror, as it's now called, was brought to the shores of the United States. And they were friends over there. Were just outraged by it. How dare they? So there's a lot of politics around the whole thing. And I think I'm glad that there's another building there. we went up to the gallery at the top, had a look around, got some B-roll, and then went down and looked at where those two, the two main towers were that came down. And I just thought, it was a bit of closure for me. I never considered myself traumatized, by the way. But in real life, I'm a psychotherapist, and I do quite a lot of work to do with post-traumatic stress. And I never considered myself traumatized by it, and I don't now. But it was much more emotional thing for me than I had imagined it might be.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things watching it for me is particularly what you were saying there about, it's not something that you necessarily feel it's traumatized you, was the way when people watch it, you took command of the situation by taking the megaphone off the police officer and going, don't go that way, kind of follow me. And so that says to me a level of logical thinking which normally comes from either military training, to get you to learn how to think in those kind of high stressful situations when most people would panic or look to leadership, and anyone making a decision, follow me, you would follow because you've abdicated responsibility to them. To then actually have someone turn around and go, well, no, that is the wrong way, says to me really that you were thinking clearly.
I did learn a lot about human nature in those moments, but I don't think there's anything special about me, but I did go into, right, okay, how do I stay safe? How do I fix this? How do I help people? And that whole thing. Interestingly, the story afterwards is in a way by far the more interesting part of it than actually what happened in those that kind of half an hour or so immediately afterwards. Because there was a lot happened that taught me a lot about human nature, and I was forcibly evacuated from my apartment, told by a big burly policeman that I had to leave. I lived about 1 block south of the World Trade Center, and it was very dusty. My apartment was knee deep in dust. But I went back there in order to, fill pans with water and buy some cans of Spam. Yeah. We didn't, but because at that stage, those of us that were right there didn't know what was happening. Was it the start of World War III? And I think there's quite a lot of footage. Amber said she was going to make this into a much longer documentary at some point, unrestricted by those 3 minutes as part of her course, because the interesting things were later on in terms of humans, extraordinarily kind humans, and money-grabbing, greedy, unpleasant humans as well.
And it's exactly the same at the moment in the pandemic, isn't it? So human nature shines through in its best and worst examples. I mean, one of the things I was going to speak to Amber about again was this longer version of the documentary, and really fits quite well with the Conflict Reportage Newsroom here, because we've been talking more about sort of the legacy, because people tend to know about big events, big traumatic events like that. It's interesting that you mentioned the tsunami as well, and so people kind of know what's happened, but then they don't really know much about the aftermath. What the impact is on people, their life going forward, how do they survive, how do they get money. We're having this whole conversation around the pandemic at the moment about, 80% of your salary furloughed, people signing on, do you want to be a fruit picker? But again, we're not under attack. We've not lost everything like all of our homes. And so really telling that story afterwards probably becomes the most important part of it. Is that something that you will collaborate with John on, or do you have a very kind of set view in your mind already? Because you try to do the 3 minutes. Actually, what do you leave out? As much as what do you use? What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I really want to extend the documentary and kind of have what I made already as the intro to it. But yeah, like you said, talk about what happened afterwards, and what happened afterwards to John was really interesting. And it's just got some great as you said, like there's some people that really helped him and get through that and it was just, that was the really powerful bit to me. But obviously I had 3 minutes, had to just try and get it in. But I want to extend it and maybe as well interview some other people about it as well. To make it probably more of a like half-hour documentary. That's my plan. What do you think?
I'm available to you.
No, I'm not helping. John, one of the questions.
I just think it's more that's the thing that just is interesting. Is the people along the way. Extraordinary bravery going on, and kindness and compassion just towards me and to lots of other people around me. But people, I can tell you, it was less than 24 hours before there were people standing on street corners in Manhattan, and they were selling dinner placemats. And what they've got photographs of the World Trade Center as it was, and they've got a laminating machine and printed off loads of these things, and they were selling them for $50. More stupidly, people were actually buying them.
Yeah. Well, if you've done your MBA, once you're an entrepreneur, aren't you? It's terrible, isn't it? I mean, John. Quick question for you as well. When you've, as someone who's do you describe yourself as a survivor of 9/11? How do you describe yourself? Because I was putting it into the blog post, and I'm like, how do I? Amber's made the film, and John he was there, and but kind of doesn't really accurately. Doesn't place you geographically that you were there, or I think Amber described it as at the foot of the tower when they collapsed. Do you see yourself as a survivor? Do you see it that way?
I guess. I've never put a label on it before. Just there. For me, it was I describe it as my Indiana Jones moment. At the beginning of the first Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
He lifts that thing, and suddenly the cave starts falling down, and he's running, and things fall down in front of him and behind him, and just whisk past his ear. Yeah. And that moment that the first tower came down, that's what I did. I never run so fast in my life. I was grabbing people along the way, grabbed this woman and picked her kid up out of the, what they call it, in the stroller, and. When we got into that World Financial Center, I'd lost the woman, and the kid was still in the stroller, and so there's this poor woman, this building's falling on her and her kid, and if that wasn't bad enough, some strange Englishman runs past and grabs her kid and runs off with it. Yeah. I tend to try and think of things like that when I'm thinking about those moments. I left the kid with somebody and stepped outside, and I could hear her screaming fairly quickly, and they were reunited within seconds. So it wasn't one of those that ended in disaster. But for me, am I a survivor? I was just one of the lucky ones. I was lucky in that. I didn't die, I didn't get injured, and I was very lucky in that I managed to do something. And it was fascinating. There was a very good friend of mine over there, a chap who had befriended me, an Englishman away from home.
An Englishman in New York?
Yeah. And he was off he wasn't in New York at the time, he was actually off in Europe on a trip, and the frustration and the rage in him because he just couldn't do anything, and I could do something, and I think that in a way that is perhaps something to do with not being suffering from post-traumatic stress symptoms about this, is that there was a problem, and that very, very human thing, isn't it, that we need problems to solve. If there's problems to solve, we can find solutions and look for solutions. Great, we're very lucky to be able to do that.
I think if you look at it in military terms, they often say, don't they, a soldier who is shot for cowardice or wins an award for bravery is one who's just decided to deal with the situation. It's quite interesting. So building on that kind of, are you or are you not, or do you see yourself as a survivor? Do you feel a responsibility to tell the story? Because I mean, this is 2 or 3 times now that I've had this conversation with you. Once on Rob's podcast, and we've spoke about it online before. Is it one of those things that you'll ever get to the point where you think, well, you won't want to talk about it, or is it because you did something about it and you kind of control the situation that you feel the need to share people with it, particularly maybe the further it gets away, or people like Amber's age, to help her to tell that story, so people have some kind of context? Because I've got an old Daily Mirror outside as part of the exhibit and the display, which I'll put up afterwards under your documentary, that's about the Twin Towers, and it's like, war on the world's at war, this kind of stuff. And as someone that was there, all of that is irrelevant because it's more about just survival, isn't it? And like I said, those acts of random human kindness, but also people making money and exploiting people, that's what we really learn about, isn't it?
It is. For me, I had left it behind. I was interviewed, I think it was the 10th anniversary of 9/11 by the BBC, and every now and again, they'll one of the BBC radio stations will ask me, they asked me when Osama bin Laden was caught, and I went in and talked about it, and they really wanted me to join in the celebrations, and I said, I just refuse to celebrate anybody's death. No matter who they are. I don't do the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing. But I'd left it behind, and it was only when I think you and I were in conversation with somebody at some point, and they were one of these conspiracy theorists. 9/11 never happened, and I just said, oh, okay. And you brought it up in the conversation, and so that's when I just related a few details to the person who believed it was all just a fiction, and that's when you came up with this idea of asking, and you asked me to tell the tale from your point of view. You great document. In a way, I never liked the spotlight shined on me in that way. But is it an important story to tell? I think in generations to come it will be. I think it's fascinating now to sit and listen to RuPaul earlier talking about what happened to Asian families in Uganda when they were expelled by Idi Amin. It's fascinating actually to sit and talk to and rather listen to documentary footage and interviews with people who were in the Nazi concentration camps. Got an acquaintance and his father, who I met a few times. He's still got the number tattooed here on his wrist. He was about 9 years old when he was pulled in there. At home for both Amber and I is Guernsey in the Channel Islands, which some people may not realise is actually a British territory, but it was occupied by the Germans.
The only one, wasn't it? I think, was it the only one? Yeah.
Fantastic. And I know people in Guernsey, elderly ladies who were referred to as jerry bags because they were 15, 16 and they had German boyfriends. And just listening to their testament, we on the news we get all the big politics of it, but those interesting things about daily life, talking to my aunt, to my mum about just ordinary life in the Blitz in London. What was it like? And you just got on with it, It was, So for me, so the long answer to your question, but I had kind of put it behind me. But when Amber asked me about this documentary, I thought, yeah, okay, fair enough. That will give me a chance to tell my story. She can capture all the footage, do with it as she likes, but then I'm going to close the door on it.
Yeah.
Which I did until today.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Just to finish off, like I said, thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us today and share your story. I mean, one of the things that I'd like to do, if possible, is to support you, Amber, to make the documentary, or to kind of, at least turn around and say to you, we were going to do something in September. COVID-19 unlock social distancing allowable. Actually, Friday is the sort of 11th of September, and it's 19 years since 9/11, before the 20th anniversary next year. Is to maybe look at showing the film again, and maybe just bring in some of the other footage that you've got that we can look at. One, I'd love to have it archived in the Conflict Reportage Archive here at the Dot Media Centre, and so it's like officially archived in what we do as testimony of someone that was there as an eyewitness. Real kind of documentarian stuff is what we've been trying to do and achieve with the Dot Media Centre Museum, Archive and Library. And the other one is just to see what we can do to support you to make the documentary a little bit longer, not necessarily with the practicality of the editorial side, because that's what you're qualified in, very, very ably, but sort of maybe exploring some blue sky thinking around what you could do to make the documentary. Is it similar stories from similar to John's from other people that say that are not American that we could maybe find? Is it people with similar stories of surviving, forgive me John, surviving something similar, whether it's the tsunami or Rwanda, something like that? So therefore it becomes more about survival testimony, or people that have eyewitnessed things that most people have seen in documentaries on YouTube or seen in the newspaper. So yeah, be up for exploring that a little bit more with you if you're interested. You can say no, it's okay.
I'd love to.
I have to say, not wanting to embarrass you, bigging up my friend here, but it was the first documentary that she ever made.
Yeah, that's what's so impressive about it, to be honest. Yeah.
Extraordinary. And when she asked me, I just, okay, great. And I was busy in life and never really thought about the quality of what this is going to be like. And somehow, subconsciously, you're expecting it to be like a student film.
Yeah.
Actually,
it certainly isn't. Yeah.
A professional look that could have been made. And I just, maybe if all it does is give you that great kickstart into a career as a documentary maker, then fantastic. I'm glad to have just been a small part of that. But she's working on a huge documentary at the moment.
Yeah.
which is actually about conflict.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. It's a bit under wraps at the moment.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Happy to screen it, happy to host it, happy to help. You know that you've got a natural home here at the Dot Media Centre, so that's cool. But thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
John, great to see you. Can I just say thanks very much for doing this, because I just think it's a really great thing that you're doing.
Thank you.
An important thing, and you put an awful lot of time and energy and devotion into it, and good effort. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Have a good day.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.